Good evening. Welcome to channel CAT by LPT, and we are doing tough enough questions for the practice of CAT this year, and we are focusing on reading comprehension today. So we'll have two passages and we'll see how to tackle tough questions. Let's have a look at the passage. On its struggle against the dominance of colonialism and the resolution it offered to those contradictions. So basically the first sentence tells us what the passage is about. Briefly, this resolution was built around a separation of domain of culture into two spheres, the material and spiritual. It was the material sphere that the claims of Western civilization were the most powerful. Science, technology, rational form of economic organization, modern methods of statecraft. These had given the European countries the strength to subjugate the non-European people. So, Western civilization was strong in the material part. To overcome this domination, the colonized people had to learn those superior techniques of organizing material life and incorporate them within their own cultures. But this could not mean the imitation of West in every aspect of life. But we should focus on however, but and these type of words where we get a sense of contrast, but this could not mean the imitation of West in every aspect of life, for then the very distinction between the West and East would vanish. The self-identity of national culture would itself be threatened. That means it was not followed in every sphere. In all these spheres it was not followed. That means the Western culture was not followed. The discourse of nationalism shows that the material spiritual distinction was condensed into an analogous but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy. Okay? Material spiritual, far more powerful dichotomy, that between the outer and inner, applying the inner outer distinction to the matter of concrete day-to-day living separates the social space into ghar and bahir. So these are Hindi words for inner and outer. The home and the world. The world is the external, the domain of the material. The home represents one's inner spiritual self, one's true identity. The world is a treacherous terrain of the pursuit of material interests, where practical considerations reign supreme. It is also typically the domain of the male. So, this is what the author is telling. The home in its essence must remain unaffected by the profane activities of the material world. Look at the strong negative word used. And the woman is its representation. So, woman is the representation of inner world. Okay, home. And so one gets an identification of social rules by gender to correspond with the separation of the social space into ghar and bahir. So this is how the influence was there on the colonized people. The colonial situation and the ideological response of nationalism to the critique of Indian tradition. Now this is where we need to understand it clearly. The colonial situation and the ideological response of nationalism to the critique of Indian tradition. introduced an entirely new substance to these dichotomies and effected their transformation. The material-spiritual dichotomy, to which terms world and home correspond, had acquired a very special significance in the nationalist mind. The world was where the European power had challenged the non-European peoples and, by virtue of its superior material culture, had subjugated them. But the nationalists asserted it had failed to colonize the inner essential identity of the East, which lay in its distinctive and superior spiritual culture. In the entire phase of the national struggle, the crucial need was to protect, preserve, and strengthen the inner core of the national culture, its spiritual essence. So, nationalists, they maintained that this was unaffected by the colonial subjugation, and it gave the core, the inner core, to the national culture. Once we match this new meaning of the home-world dichotomy with the identification of social roles by gender, we get the ideological framework within which nationalism answered the women's question. It would be a grave error to see in this, as liberals are apt to their despair at the many marks of social conservatism in nationalist practice. So, now we have liberals also. A total rejection of the West. So, as per liberals, the nationalist people rejected West completely. Quite the contrary, the nationalist paradigm in fact supplied an ideological principle of selection. So, according to nationalists or people, those who follow nationalism, they said that they provided ideological principle of selection. What kind of selection? So, what we can see, selection was like in the outer world, the West was accepted their superiority, material world, whereas in the spiritual or the inner world, the woman domain, it was not accepted. That's how the dichotomy is. Okay. Let's have a look at the question. Which one of the following, if true, would weaken the author's claim in the passage? So, we need to see what goes against the claims of author. Indian nationalists rejected the cause of English education for women during the colonial period. Certainly, women was the inner thing. So, that's how this is what supports the author's claims. Forces of colonial modernity played an important role in shaping anti-colonial Indian nationalism, certainly, because of selection. The nationalism, the character of nationalists was that inner was kept unaffected, whereas outer was affected by the colonial subjugation. The Industrial Revolution played a crucial role in shaping the economic prowess of Britain in the 18th century. That's correct. This is where their science and technology in the domain, in that domain, they prospered or they had an advantage. So, all these three, if true, they are in concurrence with the content of the passage or the arguments of the author. D. The colonial power saw the hybridization of Indian culture in all realms. So, the moment I see an extreme word, all, excuse me, it makes sense for me to examine this, and you would have seen that in the first itself, it says that this could not mean the imitation of West in every aspect of life. Not. So, if this is true, that goes against the claims of author. That's how the answer is option D. Okay. Which one of the following best describes the liberal perception of Indian nationalism? So, what was the liberal? So, where we had the term liberal coming up here in this So let's read this paragraph before I go to the questions. Once we match this new meaning of the home-world dichotomy with the identification of social roles by gender, we get the ideological framework within which nationalism answered the women's question. It would be grave error to see in this as liberals are apt to their despair at the many marks of social conservative national practice, a total rejection of West. It would be a grave error now to see in this a total rejection of West. So that means liberals are apt at their despair. However, as per the author, it would be a grave error कि totally reject किया. That means liberals would have said कि total rejection किया है. Right? So, Indian nationalism embraced the changes brought about by the colonial and women's traditional gender roles? No. इसके तो against थे वो. Against means women को उन्होंने western world से influence नहीं होने दिया. Indian nationalist discourse reaffirmed traditional gender roles for Indian women. Traditional roles were again women, home, and these were reaffirmed, and that was the liberals' perception. Indian nationalism's sophistication resided in its distinction of the material form of this. No, Indian discourse provided an ideological principle of selection. Yes, but then it was the claim of Indian nationalists, not the claims or the perception of liberals. So, tricky question where one sentence is directly taken from the passage as it is and we consider this as the answer. This is where the trick is. It was about the liberals' perception. So, liberals' perception was that there has been no change in the women because of the Western influence. However, the nationalists responded that it was their selection deliberately that they did so, not by rejecting the West completely. So, B is the answer option. On the basis of the information in the passage, all of the following are true about the spiritual material dichotomy except. So, all true except, that means one which is not true, or one which is not given in the passage. We need to think about these type of questions very carefully. So, whenever we have a question of except, see that the condition is fulfilled by 3. If it is fulfilled by 3 options, the 4th automatically becomes the answer. Right? Okay. So, spiritual material dichotomy के बारे में क्या चीज़ true है? Helped in safeguarding the identity of Indian nationalism, correct? That's how the identity was created. Option B says constituted the premise of Ghar Bahir dichotomy, correct? Represented a continuum of age-old oppositions in Indian culture. No, there was no opposition in the Indian culture regarding this. Ghar Bahir idea was not there in the Indian culture, and it represented. It is not, it is the new identity because of the colonization. Was not as ideologically powerful as the inner-outer dichotomy, correct? It was not as powerful, right? So, option A, B and D are true as per the passage. C is not true as per the passage. Which of the following explains the contradictory pulls on Indian nationalism? So, it talks about contradictory pulls. Let's have a look at the option. Despite its spiritual superiority, Indian nationalism had to fight against colonial domination. Now, that's not the contradictory part. The contradictory part is simply in spite of fighting the colonial forces, they had to accept certain aspects of the colonial masters also. So that was the dichotomy. They were fighting, however, they were accepting also in certain cases. So A is not explaining that contradictory pull. B, despite this fight against the colonial domination, Indian nationalism had to borrow from the colonizers in the spiritual sphere. They didn't borrow in the spiritual sphere. Despite this fight against the colonizers, Indians had to borrow from the colonizers in the material sphere. Yes, this is true. Despite its scientific and technological inferiority, this had to fight against colonial domination and despite inferior. So that's an absurd kind of a statement. Answer option is C. Right? So the toughness of these questions is typically based on the structure of questions, how the questions are framed, not actually based on the difficulty level of the passages. Shall we have a look at the next passage? Many people believe that truth conveys power, hence sticking with the truth is the best strategy for gaining power. Unfortunately, this is just a comforting myth. In fact, truth and power have a far more complicated relationship because in human society, power means two very different things. So now, this paragraph itself tells me that this passage is going to deal with two things, that is truth and power. So that's going to be the subject matter, right? On the one hand, power means having the ability to manipulate objective realities, to hunt animals, to construct bridges, to cure diseases, to build atom bombs. This kind of power is closely tied to truth. If you believe a false physical theory, you won't be able to build an atom bomb. That means in this kind of power, truth reigns in supremely, right? So this is where the truth is actually power. On the other hand, power also means having the ability to manipulate human beliefs. Thereby getting lots of people to cooperate effectively. Building atom bombs require not just a good understanding of physics, but also the coordinated labor of millions of humans. Planet Earth was conquered by Homo sapiens rather than by chimpanzees or elephants because we are the only mammals that can cooperate in very large numbers. And large-scale cooperation depends on believing common stories. But these stories need not be true. This is where the interesting part is. You can unite millions of people by making them believe in completely fictional stories about God, about race, or about economics. The dual nature of power and the truth results in the curious fact that we humans know many more truths than any other animal, but we also believe in much more nonsense. Here the nonsense means fiction. When it comes to uniting people around a common story, fiction actually enjoys three inherent advantages over the truth. So, fiction has three inherent advantages over the truth when it comes to uniting people around a common story. First, whereas the truth is universal, fiction tends to be local. Consequently, if we want to distinguish a tribe from the foreigners, a fictional story will serve us as a far better identity marker than a true story. The second huge advantage of fiction over truth has to do with the handicap principle, which says that reliable signals must be costly to the signaler. Otherwise, they can easily be faked by cheaters. Let's try to understand this. The second huge advantage of fiction over truth has to do with the handicap principle, which says that reliable signals must be costly to the signaler. Okay, if the signal is reliable, then it must be costly to the signaler. Otherwise, they can easily be faked by cheaters. If political loyalty is signaled by believing a true story, anyone can fake it. But believing ridiculous and outlandish stories exacts greater cost and is therefore a better signal of loyalty. Very interesting. Third and most important, the truth is often painful and disturbing. Hence, if you stick to unalloyed reality, very interesting word, unalloyed reality, few people will follow you. An American presidential candidate who tells the American public the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about American history has a 100% guarantee of losing the elections. An uncompromising adherence to the truth is an admirable spiritual practice, but it is not a winning political strategy. So you can see in some of the political strategies, you have to be willing to tell fiction, right? Even if we need to pay some price for deactivating our rational faculties, the advantages of increased social cohesion are often so big that fictional stories routinely triumph over the truth in human history. तो human history में कौन सी stories जो हैं वो ज़्यादा triumph, ज़्यादा successful, ज़्यादा kind of popular रही हैं? They are fictions because they help in social cohesion. Scholars have known this for thousands of years, which is why scholars often had to decide whether they served the truth or social harmony. So scholars, writers, उनको ये काफ़ी पहले से पता था और स्कॉलर्स को अक्सर डिसाइड करना पड़ता था कि वो ट्रुथ को ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंस दें या वो सोशल हार्मनी को ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंस दें. Should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same fiction, or should they let people know the truth even at the price of disunity? Very interesting. So basically social cohesion is fiction, and if it is like complete truth, then it is disunity. That's the final thing that the author is telling us. Okay, let's have a look at the questions. Regarding which one of the following quotes could we argue that the author overemphasized the importance of fiction? So अभी हमने देखा कि fiction को वैसे ही वो खूब ज़्यादा emphasize कर रहा है, जहाँ पर over emphasize हो रहा है. Let us see. Scholars often had to decide whether they serve the truth or social harmony. Should they aim to unite people, this, or should they let people know the truth? Now here it is telling that fiction is required for social unity even at the cost of suppressing certain elements of truth. So emphasizing on importance of fiction. Hence, sticking with the truth is the best strategy for gaining power. Unfortunately, this is just a comforting myth. यहाँ पर ऑथर ने अभी फिक्शन की बात ही नहीं की है. वो कह रहा है कि ये तो कंफर्टिंग मिथ है, बट उसने फिक्शन को ओवर एम्फेसाइज नहीं किया, एम्फेसाइज ही नहीं किया है. सो बी इज नॉट द आंसर ऑप्शन. In fact, truth and power have far more complicated this. Power means two very different things. Fiction has not been mentioned here or emphasized here. On the one hand, power means having the ability to manipulate objective reality, to hunt this, to build atom bombs. यहाँ पर emphasis is on truth, not on fiction. So ये भी नहीं है, ये भी नहीं है, ये भी नहीं है. This is where the author is over-emphasizing the importance of fiction. The central theme of the passage is about choice between. अभी हमने लास्ट में देखा ही था. So we can simply come to the answer, and that is attaining social cohesion and propagating objective truth. दोनों के बीच में choice. The author implies that like scholars, successful leaders. तो scholars को क्या है? उनको पता है कि क्या चीज़ important है, social cohesion या objective truth. तो like this, the leaders. अब leaders के लिए today know how to create social cohesion better than in the past? No. Scholars के बारे में ऐसा नहीं कहा जा रहा है. ये तो कहा जा रहा है कि scholars को बहुत पहले से पता है. Know how to balance truth and social unity. Balance. Okay. Let's see. क्या balance की बात हो रही है? Need to leverage both type of powers to remain in office. Now, जो scholars हैं, they have to keep कितना बताना है, कितना नहीं बताना at the cost of social unity, उसकी बात हो रही है. But to remain power, to remain in office, that's not the idea presented. Use myths to attain first type of power. No, first type of power के लिए तो myth चाहिए ही नहीं, right? So the answer option is B. Know how to balance truth and social unity. The author would support none of the following statements about political power except that. So this is a little tricky question. So be careful while answering these type of questions. Here you can see the author would support none except. It means the author would support something. So it is negative. It is also negative. That's how what we are looking at. What is it that the author is going to support about political power? While unalloyed truth is not recommended, leaders should stay as close as possible to it. He says the balance. सब कुछ अगर सच बताया तो they have 100% chances of losing the power. People cannot handle the unvarnished truth, so leaders retain power by deviating from it. क्योंकि unvarnished truth means something which is not including any fiction. So that is unvarnished, and they understand political power के लिए unvarnished truth तो हम दे नहीं सकते because उससे social unity नहीं आती है, और लीडर को पावर के लिए एक यूनाइट करना बहुत ज़रूरी है. So B is making sense. There are definite advantages to promoting fiction, but there needs to be some limit. Author doesn't talk about limit. It talks about the advantages of promoting fiction, but not in terms of telling anything about fiction. Limit to it. So C is not the answer option. Manipulating people's belief is politically advantageous, but a leader who propagates only myths is likely to lose power. Nothing of this. A leader who propagates only truth will not gain power. That is told. It's not this. ये तो उल्टा है. So C ruled out, D ruled out, A ruled out. That's how B is the answer option. Now these were two passages that we took from previous year CAT, and we figured out that these are bit on the complex side. However, if you pay little attention to the structure of questions. You should be in a position to answer these very easily, and that's how they have to be attempted. We have Telegram and Instagram channels where we keep on posting you lot of stuff for your preparation and information about these type of sessions coming your way. We have a lot of sessions coming your way. So make sure to subscribe to these channels and keep yourself updated. Wish you all the best for your preparation. Take care. Bye-bye.